This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the pearly pullover together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 10. Yay! Oh my goodness, we're so close to having a finished sweater. That is assuming that you are keeping up with me, but remember that you don't need to. It's okay. So today we're going to talk about the finishing work that will go into making your sweater as lovely as it can be. So that includes the bind off, which I've already done, Kitchener stitch for the underarms, which Jane is holding everything I'm set up to do, and weaving in ends. Normally weaving in ends, you don't really have to worry about it, you know, because it's on the inside of the work. And so just sort of, you know, go through an inch or two's worth of stitches, make sure the end is sort of stabilized in the fabric, and call it done. However, because we are going to be wearing our sweaters pearl fabric side out, the usual way that maybe you run through a bunch of purl bumps, that isn't going to look so great when you wear the sweater inside out. So I usually, and actually for this sweater, for the original that Jane's wearing, I basically did sort of Swiss darning, which is going through all those stitches, following the path of the yarn that's already in the stitch, and then it just sort of duplicates that, locks in the end, and is virtually invisible on this side. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, for the bind off, I recommend just using a standard knit bind off when you're all done. And the reason for that is it's a good firm edge. It can close things up just a tiny bit. It's not stretchy like some sort of lacy bind offs. I'm pointing to the shawl I'm wearing, which is the thistle leaf shawl, which does use a what's considered a lace bind off, where you purl two together through the back loops all the way along, and that it uses more yarn per stitch, and so it makes a more flexible bind off. But we don't want flexibility up in our neckline, so for that I just did a standard knit bind off. I did not bind off in pattern, which is to say I did not knit 6, purl 1, binding off all those stitches as I went along. I just wanted a straight, simple bind off. If you are worried that your neckline is too open, one of my friends said that what she's doing is she's doing the Kitchener stitch first when she thinks she's at the right point for her neckline. And then she's going to try the sweater on. And once she's Kitchenered it, she really knows how it fits in the yoke, and she can decide whether that's high enough for her, or if she wants to do some more raglan decreases, or you could even just make the ribbing a little deeper if you just want a little more fabric and you feel like it's sort of fitting well enough but not up high enough. So I thought that was a great idea. And then also, even if you decide that you need to knit a bit more, the Kitchener stitch is already out of the way. You've done your underarms, so all you'll need to do is the bind off and weaving in those ends. So it's a great way to kind of get some more finishing work done. But now we're going to go back to the knit side, and we're going to do Kitchener stitch for the underarms, and that gives us a nice smooth underarm with no bulky seam here. So I haven't taken the working yarn, the waste yarn out, so let me do that. And but I have already threaded my stitches back onto the needle I was using, and I do prefer using the needle that I've been working with all along to make sure that all the stitches really are the same size. If you have already turned your needle over to a new project, something one size up or down will probably be okay. All right, so now I have all of my stitches lined up, my good little soldiers. They're going to be matched up each to each, and so make sure that you've got the correct number of stitches, that they're lined up in parallel on the needles, and we're going to with maybe a yard, a little less, of working yarn threaded onto a blunt tip tapestry needle, we're going to begin weaving in our ends. And I like to tuck in any ends from the actual sweater down into the sweater before doing this, and then dealing with all those ends later. The two ends, the beginning and the end of the Kitchener section, and any ends from especially the sleeve. So we begin what I like to think of as the middle of the action, and we're going to put the yarn through the front stitch as if to purl, pull it through, leaving, say, a 6-inch tail, and hang on to that tail. Remember, we're always going to be working sort of underneath the needles here because we're creating this extra row of fabric between these two, and you don't want to put it over because that will then confuse you and you'll think you have another stitch. And now we go to the back and go through as if to knit. Pull it through gently. Oops. Try not to get your tail all snagged up. And now we're ready to actually finish off the first stitch. We're going to go back to the front and go through the stitch again as if to knit, remembering, as we talked about in duplicate stitch, that every stitch is gone through twice essentially. And we put it through as if to knit and jump it off the needle, and there's your first stitch done. Pull gently here. This is your new row of stitches, and we can tighten it up later. Don't pull it really tight because again you'll get puckering here and you won't be happy with that. And now we're back to the first move we did, which is putting the needle through as if to purl on the front. Now we go back to the back and purl and take the stitch off, and be sure, it's a little tangly here at the beginning, be sure not to forget to go through the back stitch as if to knit. And we're just going to keep going back and forth, adding one stitch to our lovely pile of woven stitches on the right and taking away from our waiting stitches on the left. And here I want to show you, let's see, let's do one more and then I'll show you where we're at, and you can see how it looks. Okay, and so don't forget, I'm putting the needle through as if to knit on the back. And I have to say that is where I fall down sometimes, is forgetting to do the second step of feeding the yarn through the next stitch before going back to the stitch we're taking off. And here you can start to see that row of stitches, and we can tighten this up. You can see here as I'm pulling on this, the tail, we can snug up those stitches later, and basically what you'll do is you'll go back over them and find the row of stitches and just sort of pull gently with your tapestry needle to tighten that stitch up or loosen it as necessary. I like to start from the middle usually and work my way out to both ends if things are loose. If they are tight, I'll start at one end and I will create a really big stitch. In fact, so here, let's say this is tight. And I will take out a lot of slack from the tail and move it along the stitches, so as to make sure that we have a nice smooth area and that it is virtually invisible. That is the charm of Kitchener, that not only does it look invisible, but it feels invisible when you're wearing it. And now I'm going to go back and finish up this one and off. And as you do it more, as you work the Kitchener stitch more, you will get more comfortable with what is the right tension to put on the yarn as you're pulling it through. But as I said, it's better always to be a little loose and tighten things up later. It really is harder if everything is tight when you finish the row. It creates puckering, and then you really do need to go back and go over that so that it is comfortable and that it wears nicely. So that's the basics of Kitchener stitch. I'm just going to quickly finish this up because I want to talk about one last bit of Kitchener stitch information, and that is finishing it off at the end. If you've done Kitchener stitch before and you've discovered that you have these holes at either side of your lovely woven area, First of all, let me remind you to scoot your stitches up every once in a while so that you are working close to the tips. Oh, and see, you have to be careful about that and keep that working yarn underneath your needles so that you don't end up creating more stitches for yourself that don't really apply, that don't need to be Kitchenered. Okay. I'm going a little quicker than usual. I'm sure it will cause some sort of disastrous result. And I see that I snagged a bit of yarn there. So I will deal with that on the next stitch. And here we go. So that one got a little snagged. Now I do know some people who take their stitches to be Kitchenered off the needles completely and work it sort of flat. And I'm totally impressed with that level of bravery. That is not my thing. So I like to keep everything on the needles, but you certainly can do it. And you're basically just creating that additional row of knitted stitches. And it's sort of a good lesson in how a stitch is formed if you can do it. But I hope you can see it here as we go along, that the going back and forth between the two lines of stitches and creating that third row, that you have to go through each stitch twice to create that new row of knitting. That's how knitting works. Okay, so I'm almost to the end, and it's this one last little bit that will help you with those holes because they are there because we haven't attached that new row of knitting to the existing fabric. So I have jumped my last stitch on the front needle off, you know, as if to knit, and now I want to go through the next stitch in the fabric, which is over here. It's that one, if you can see that, and I'm going to go through it as if to purl, and that anchors the Kitchener line into the existing sweater fabric. And now as if to purl here, and we'll discard the needles, and then we'll want to go through right up here, and it's this one, but we're going to go through as if to knit, and that will help close up that hole. And the rest of the closing up we will do on the back of the work. But as you can see, the hole, it's not completely gone, okay? I can't make it completely go away because we're bringing fabric in a few directions together. But on the other side, we can now, hopefully, okay, so here we are, and these are my ends from before, but what I generally like to do is, working carefully, I will sort of go back and forth and close up that hole a little, you know, go from one side to the other. Sometimes there's a little bit of a star that happens there, but I think it's a small price to pay. Nobody's really going to be examining your underarm too closely. But remember, you can see here that things are a little loose. I'm going to let that tail go, and I'm going to go back to the side that we were working on, and I'm going to work from the end I just finished back to the beginning and move that slack out. Let's see, I think it's this one. And just move that slack along in my line of stitches, and it will all smooth out and come back over to here. But already, you know, it's not too bad. And in fact, the blocking can sort of even things out a little too, but I'm going to definitely, I think I see it start here. And see, I just pull out that loop and then go to the next stitch over. Don't pull too tightly, be gentle. And there we go. You can see I'm already starting to move that slack over. And then it will come all the way out here at this end. And then I will want to go back and do the same thing to help close up. Can you see that hole there? We'll go through this next stitch here, back to our first stitch, and through this stitch over here, and then close things up on the other side. So that's the rest of our finishing work, and I have one more underarm to do here, and that will be all smooth and nice and ready for blocking. So there you have it. I want to get to the point to talking about the one thing we actually are going to do on the purl side of the fabric before wearing it, and that is weaving in the ends. So for the ends, you know, at your cuff and hem and the collar, you can just do sort of a standard, however you like to do it. You may also want to consider just weaving it in on the knit side of the fabric. That is assuming that you're never going to want to wear it knit side out as well. Since I like to have that flexibility of wearing it whichever side out I want, I'm just looking for an end to weave in. And this sleeve was done with alternating skeins, so there's no end in the middle. I think there's some here in the body. So what I like to do to make sure that everything is invisible is, as I mentioned earlier, to do basically a duplicate stitch. And I'd like to look at it on the purl side. You could look at it on the knit side if you want, but I found I had better success making sure they were as invisible as possible by weaving them in on the purl side. We're going to look for the path of the stitches and start close to where we just came out. And you're going to go up through a stitch and find that and follow that purl bump down into the next stitch and down to the purl bump sort of below it. So you're going to go back and forth weaving in. It basically goes over, it happens over 2 rows that you'll see as you go along, and it really is virtually invisible. And you're going to go through each stitch that you're actually weaving into twice, once at the top and once at the bottom, or at least that's how I like to think about it. So here we are weaving in those ends, following the path of the yarn, and we're going to go over this stitch and we're going to come down into this stitch, and you'll see how it's going around there, and then the yarn actually loops around here and comes down to this stitch. So we're going to follow along here, and we go back into that stitch that we went through before, and you can see here where it's a little bumpy, and I'm going to pull it a little tighter, and the stitches virtually disappear there. So there are the stitches that we've basically done a duplicate stitch to, and there they are on the top, and you really can't see them. So let's find another end to weave in. How about one of the ends from the hem? Now, one other thing that I like to do here, because we have these 2 ends, remember, we're going to want to sort of complete the circle here. Now I do sew in one end at a time. Weave in, I should say. So I want to find where my cast on stitches are and go back through there and make that join virtually invisible. And I do need to take it back to the other side, so I'm just going to go back through again here, and now we'll do some duplicate stitch. I'm going to go through this one and up here, and now I'm going to follow this, and you see how it's here, it's this purl bump, and then it comes down and becomes this purl bump, and so we're just going to follow the path of the stitches and go in and out, making that sort of zigzag all the way along. And there you have it. And I think going over the 5 stitches between the rib should be sufficient for this. If you feel like maybe your yarn's a little slippery, or you just feel like having longer ends woven in, you could keep going, or you could move up a row. I'm going to leave that up to you. We'll call that knitter's choice. And there we have woven in one more end, and as you know, I have two ends over here, and so I will sew this one and weave it in going in this direction so as to not have too much bulk. You can see there, you almost more can feel it than see it, that there's more yarn there, but it is essentially invisible. Do not pull tight. When you pull tight, you'll strain the fabric and make it more visible. So if anything, leave it a little loose. As I've said before, you can always tighten things up. It's more difficult to give stitches additional fabric afterwards, so don't do that. And it really is virtually invisible, and I will show you in close-up as well. So that's weaving in the ends. It's really just like Swiss darning. And we should actually look at it from the front side too, and you really can't see anything different. It will make the stitches ever so slightly thicker, but it's really unnoticeable. So don't worry about those ends showing through. When I'm weaving in ends on a normal piece, I do tend to just sort of go through a row of purl bumps for about an inch and then go back in the next row above and just sort of weave the end through those bumps rather than doing the whole up and down, because it does take a little bit more time and focus and patience. But this sweater is definitely worth that. So that's, oh my goodness, can you see how those twisted purl stitches from the right side have now become these great high relief ribs on the purl side of the fabric. So, and oh, I should also show you the raglan lines. And just a reminder again, if you haven't downloaded the updated version of the pattern yet, you should. The link was in your last newsletter. So I'm not going to say anything more about that because it's all good now, and hopefully you're watching this later and you didn't have this problem, and it will just all be good. And I think that's really it. If you have any questions about Kitchener stitch or binding off, feel free to ask them in the forums. And that's on Ravelry in the Kathleen Dames Design Forum. There will be a thread for this episode there, and the link to that thread is in the show notes. And just a reminder that the show notes tell you all sorts of things, including where to find the pattern and what I'm wearing today and how to find that pattern, and always includes a link to the show notes. So I think that's everything for today. Next week, we're gonna block our sweater. And I'm always excited to block a sweater because I love stomping on it. If you watched season 1, episode 11, you've seen me stomp on a sweater before, but I'm happy to do it again, all in pursuit of the perfectly finished sweater. So I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, remember, you can always ask them. Don't be shy. If you have a question, somebody else does too. So just keep that in mind and be brave and ask the question. So thank you so much for being here. Next week we will be blocking, and then the week after that, oh my goodness, we're done, we're finished. We have a sweater, and I will be wearing my sweater and singing its praises while I talk to you. So until then, thank you so much for being here, and happy knitting. Mwah! Bye. This is season 2 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit the Pearly Pullover together. Many thanks to Reen at Happy Fuzzy Yarns, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship captains, and you for being a part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Don't forget to visit kathleendames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter before July 22nd to receive your free copy of the Pearly Pullover in your welcome email. Is it after July 22nd? Just not a joiner? Purchase your copy of the Pearly Pullover from my Ravelry shop anytime. Be sure to share your progress on social media with the hashtags Pearly Pullover and KD Sweater. Questions? Comments? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum today. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting!